Welcome back everyone. In today's session, I'm going to give you the line-by-line explanation of The Cookie Lady written by Philip K.Dick. Do check the pinned comment section for all important video links related to your syllabus. This is another video on request, a one-shot session. And students, kindly subscribe to our channel and also tap the bell icon. Do not forget to like, share and comment as well. Let's open page number 141 and let's read this section. This is very important. So, what is it all about? First published in fantasy fiction, The Cookie Lady is a story of terror. What is the genre of this story? Horror. The genre of this story is horror, and I'm going to discuss the key elements of horror in detail in this session. Terror. Chilling and memorable. It tells the tale of a chubby teenager boy called Bubber who visits the kindly old neighborhood lady who bakes him cookies. It seems that this encounter is a mundane encounter between this young boy Bubber and the old lady Mrs. Drew. Initially, there is nothing wrong or abnormal in this, but as the story unfolds, we see the themes of transformation, temptation and horror. What Bubber does not know is that the Cookie Lady has an agenda, a motive. She is not as kindly as she seems. We have the theme of appearance versus reality. Initially, she is depicted as the kindly, loving, affectionate old lady, neighborhood lady, but gradually she is exposed as a strange, selfish woman, enchanting like a sorceress, remorseless, ruthless, and she does not have moral scruples. Character sketch of Mrs. Drew is important, so prepare your long answer, question and short answer properly. Character sketch. Don't worry, I'm going to discuss that as well in this session. In a chilling manner, the apparently kindly lady who feeds Bubber cookies steals his life force. This is her motive, the vicious motive of this woman. We get a hint in the story that she has done this before and that Bubber is one of the many children she has treated in this manner. The remorseless nature of Mrs. Drew. The story is remarkable for the manner in which the atmosphere builds up. The security that the reader is lulled into at the beginning of the story is slowly and inexorably chipped away as it is replaced by a growing unease which changes to terror. The elements of horror in this story. The interaction of Bubber and Mrs. Drew creates the conflict in the story, and the ending is the outcome of the conflict when we witness Mrs. Drew being transformed and experiencing the rejuvenation of youthfulness. The title, The Cookie Lady, is simple yet meaningful and suggestive. It arouses the curiosity of the readers and also adds an element of intrigue to the narrative. The Cookie Lady is Mrs. Drew, and she is portrayed as an elderly woman who bakes cookies. Cookies play an important role in the narrative. Cookies are a very powerful symbol in the story. The cookies are the object of desire and temptation for Bubber, and Mrs. Drew utilizes this temptation as a bait to lure Bubber, the naive young Bubber, unsuspecting boy, into a trap. The term lady again is important. The term lady implies a certain level of respect and dignity which contrasts with the neglected state of her house. Her house is old and dilapidated. This contrast sets the stage for the surprising revelations that unfold throughout the story. The title also establishes the Cookie Lady, Mrs. Drew, as the main protagonist of this story, the transformation of this Cookie Lady. Very quickly, the main elements of the horror genre. Girls and boys, prepare your long answer question. Very important, the horror genre. Number 1, The writer instills a sense of fear in the readers, and to accomplish this, the writer uses suspense. Instead of showing the readers the monster, the supernatural right away at the beginning, he hints at its presence, leaving enough room for the imagination of the readers to run wild. After that, the writer also introduces an aspect of the unknown, because the unknown serves as the dark, uncharted territory where our deepest fears and anxieties reside. Here, Philip K.Dick has done exactly that. He has also added thrilling plot twists. What is the role of these twists? The thrilling plot twists can deepen the character development and the narrative complexity, and that's why The Cookie Lady is such an interesting read. And another element of the horror genre is to write an ending that contains hope. A horror genre story must contain hope at the end. And without this dash of hope, a horror story can feel relentlessly bleak. The readers can receive a shock, a jolt, and you will see that when we come towards the ending of the story, the readers in The Cookie Lady also receive such a shock. In Cookie Lady, the ending does not contain hope. The ending is bleak. It is macabre, and it leads to the exploration of many complex themes which are there in the narrative. Now, the explanation, the line by line explanation. "Where are you going, Bubber?" Ernie Mill shouted from across the street, fixing papers for his route. Ernie Mill, the minor character, Bubber's friend. "No place, Bubber," Searle said. So, Bubber does not disclose where he is going. "You going to see your lady friend?" But Ernie knows where he is going. He is going to see his lady friend. Ernie laughed and laughed. Ernie makes fun of Bubber. "What do you go visit that old lady for?" So the lady friend is an old lady, and he wonders why Bubber keeps on going to that old lady's house. What is the purpose of his regular visits? He wants to know. Let us in on it. Ernie appears to be somewhat nosy and interfering, and he makes fun of his friend, but Bubber does not pay any attention to Ernie. He turned the corner and went down M Street. Already he could see the house at the end of the street, set back a little on the lot. The front of the house was overgrown with weeds, old dry weeds that rustled and chattered in the wind. The house itself was a little grey box, shabby and unpainted. The description of the house is significant. This is the primary setting of the story, Mrs. Drew's house, and it is described as a small, shabby and unpainted structure at the end of M Street. It is portrayed as neglected with overgrown weeds surrounding it, and this symbolizes the isolation and loneliness that Mrs. Drew experiences. There was unpainted, the porch steps sagging. There was an old weather-beaten rocking chair on the porch with a torn piece of cloth hanging over it. The dilapidated porch, sagging steps, and the weather-beaten rocking chair emphasize the decrepit state of the house. The reader is introduced to a sense of solitude, loneliness and quietude. So, the outside, the exterior of the house shows that the house is in a neglected state. And the color grey, it was a little grey box. Grey is a color which is not associated with something bright, hopeful and cheerful. Grey is associated with the mundane and often with the ominous, with the evil. Bubber went up the walk. As he started up the rickety steps, he took a deep breath. This is not a sigh of sadness, but this is a sigh of happiness. This is a sigh of wish fulfillment. He could smell it, the wonderful warm smell, and his mouth began to water, his heart thudding with anticipation, with excitement, with happiness. Bubber turned the handle of the bell. He was about to enter into a world of wish fulfillment, happiness. The bell grated rustily on the other side of the door. There was silence for a time. Then the sounds of someone stirring. We have alliteration over here. Mrs. Drew opened the door. She was old, very old, a little dried up old lady. Just like the house, the old neglected house, this lady also is described as old. In fact, very old, with her withered body. Like the weeds, simile, like the weeds that grew along the front of the house. The exterior of the house is compared to the outward appearance of this lady. She smiled down at Bubber, holding the door wide for him to come in. So we are introduced to this lady, and she is shown as someone who is old, and she is all alone in this house. You are just in time. This shows that this lady has been expecting Bubber, and Bubber is frequently coming to her house. She said, "Come on inside." So a warm greeting. She is affectionate. She warmly greets the boy. "Come on inside, Bernard. You are just in time. They are just now ready." What are just now ready? The cookies are ready. Bubber went to the kitchen door and looked in. He could see them resting on a big blue plate on the top of the stove. Cookies, a plate of warm fresh cookies right out of the oven. Cookies with nuts and raisins in them. Delicious cookies, and Bubber is a glutton. He is greedy for the cookies, and he has come here. In fact, he has been coming here in order to satiate this craving of his. He craves for these cookies. He hankers after these cookies. And in the beginning, we find that Mrs. Drew is kind enough to help Bubber fulfill his wishes, to fulfill his cravings. The kitchen is an important setting in the story. It is the kitchen where Mrs. Drew bakes the cookies that hold a special allure for Bubber. The warmth and aroma of freshly baked cookies contribute to the inviting and comforting atmosphere in Mrs. Drew's house. Interestingly, the exterior of the house is not so appealing, but as soon as Bubber enters into the house, he can smell the fragrance, the aroma of freshly baked cookies. So what kind of imagery is this? This is olfactory imagery as well as visual imagery. The plate of warm fresh cookies, visual imagery, and Bubber taking in a deep breath and smelling the aroma of freshly baked cookies, olfactory imagery. How do they look? Mrs. Drew said. So we come to know that Mrs. Drew has a special bond with Bubber. She rustled past him into the kitchen. "And maybe some cold milk too. You like cold milk with them." She knows what Bubber likes, and therefore she is eager to serve him that kind of food. She got the milk pitcher from the window box on the back porch. Then she poured a glass of milk for him and set some of the cookies on a small plate. "Let's go into the living room. We also have the living room," she said. Bubber nodded. Mrs. Drew carried the milk and the cookies in and set them on the arm of the couch. Then she sat down in her own chair, watching Bubber plop himself down by the plate and begin to help himself. Bubber ate greedily as usual, intent on the cookies, his main focus, the cookies, silent except for chewing sounds. Mrs. Drew waited patiently until the boy had finished and his already ample sides bulged that much more. When Bubber was done with the plate, he glanced toward the kitchen again, hopeful of getting some more cookies and the rest of the cookies on the stove. So he is greedy for them. Wouldn't you like to wait until later for the rest? Mrs. Drew said. All right, Bubber agreed. How were they? Fine, that's good. She leaned back in her chair. Well, what did you do in school today? How did it go? The interaction between Mrs. Drew and the boy. They appear friendly. Both of them are comfortable with each other. All right. The little old lady watched the boy look restlessly around the room. Bernard, she said presently, won't you stay and talk to me for a while? This shows that Mrs. Drew is longing for Bubber's company. She lives all alone in this house, and whenever Bubber comes, she feels good. She is in a happy space, and therefore she wants Bubber's company, and they enjoy each other's company. He had some books on his lap, some school books. Why don't you read to me from your books? So reading is a favorite pastime of the lady. She wants Bubber to read to her from his books. You know, I don't see too well anymore. She is aged and therefore she has a weak, poor eyesight. And it's comfort to me to be read too. Can I have the rest of the cookies after? Here, Mrs. Drew is longing for companionship. He wants Bubber to read to her, but Bubber is fixed on the cookies. He just wants to eat the cookies. He is projected as greedy for the cookies. Of course. And she readily agrees. Bubber moved over towards her to the end of the couch. He opened his books, World Geography, Principles of Arithmetic, Hoyte's Speller. Which do you want? She hesitated. The geography. Bubber opened the big blue book at random. Peru. Peru is bounded on the north by Ecuador and Colombia, on the south by Chile, and on the east by Brazil and Bolivia. Peru is divided into three main sections. These are: first, the little old lady watched him read, his fat cheeks wobbling as he read, holding his finger next to the line. She was silent, watching him, studying the boy intently as he read, drinking in each frown of concentration, every motion of his arms and hands. She relaxed, letting herself sink back in her chair. He was very close to her, the close proximity, only a little way off. There was only the table and lamp between them. How nice it was to have him come. Her longing for companionship. He had been coming for over a month now, regular visits of Bubber, ever since the day she had been sitting on her porch and seen him go by and thought to call to him, pointing to the cookies by her rocker. Why had she done it? She did not know. She had been alone. Loneliness, theme of loneliness and alienation. She had been alone so long that she found herself saying strange things and doing strange things. She saw so few people only when she went down to the store or the mailman came with her pension check or the garbage men. So here everything seems to be fine. She is an elderly lady who is fond of Bubber's company and she wants his company because she is all alone here. The boy's voice droned on. She was comfortable, peaceful and relaxed. The positive impact of Bubber's visit. The little old lady closed her eyes and folded her hands in her lap. And as she sat dozing and listening, something began to happen. The little old lady was beginning to change, her grey wrinkles and lines dimming away. As she sat in the chair, she was growing younger, the thin, fragile body filling out with youth again. Now this is not natural. This is the abnormality. The grey hair thickened and darkened, color coming to the wispy strands, her arms filled to the mottled flesh turning a rich hue color as it had been once many years before the transformation of Mrs. Drew. She is regaining her youth. She is now an old lady, but in the presence of Babur, as Babur is reading to her, she is very close to him and she is relaxing and gradually regaining her youthfulness. Mrs. Drew breathed deeply, not opening her eyes. She could feel something happening within herself, but she did not know just what. So this is where we can see the elements of the horror genre. The writer is gradually instilling fear in the readers by intensifying the suspense. We have fear, we have suspense, and slowly the readers will feel disgust and shock at the end. He is introducing the element of the unknown, and this is a plot twist, and such twists are gradually drawing in the readers to the narrative, into the narrative. She could feel something happening. Dick, the writer, is not explaining. He is not elaborating of what it is. He just says that she is regaining her youthful vitality, vigor, and she is also changing. Her physical appearance is changing. The grey hair thickened and darkened, color coming to the wispy strands, visual imagery. And this is going to instill fear in the readers. Something was going on. She could feel it. He is just hinting at it. Hinting at the presence of the supernatural. He is not explaining everything right away. And it was good. It was good for Mrs. Drew. But what it was, she did not exactly know. It had happened before also. Another very important piece of information. Almost every time the boy came and sat by her, especially of late since she had moved her chair nearer to the couch, foreshadowing evil. This is not good. She is coming closer to Babur. And as she is coming closer, as the connection is getting closer and closer, this change is taking place. She took a deep breath. How good it felt. The warm fullness, a breath of warmth inside her cold body for the first time in years. She experiences the rejuvenation of youthfulness. In her chair, the little old lady had become a dark-haired matron of perhaps 30, a woman with full cheeks and plump arms and legs. Her physical appearance has changed. Her lips were red again. Her neck even a little too fleshy as it had been once in the long forgotten past. Her lips were red again. Red is a warm color associated with beauty, attractiveness, and youth. She is young. She is beautiful once again. Her neck even a little too fleshy as it had been once in the long forgotten past. In the past, she was an attractive young woman. Now she is old and she is again feeling the vitality of youth. Suddenly the reading stopped. Babur put down his book and stood up. I have to go, he said. Can I take the rest of the cookies with me? Babur is only thinking about the cookies. She blinked, rousing herself. She has been in a trance-like state. The boy was in the kitchen filling his pockets with cookies. She nodded, dazed, in a trance-like state, still under the spell. The boy took the last cookies. He went across the living room to the door. Mrs. Drew stood up. All at once the warmth left her. The vitality, the vigor left her. She felt tired and very dry, withered, wrinkled. She caught her breath, breathing quickly. She looked down at her hands, and her hands are now wrinkled and thin. Oh, she murmured, despair of Mrs. Drew. Tears blurred her eyes. It was gone again as soon as he moved away. Here we get this piece of information that Mrs. Drew regains her youth as she moves closer to Bubber, and as soon as Bubber moves away from her, she is again old. She tottered to the mirror above the mantel and looked at herself, at her appearance, at her reflection. Old faded eyes stared back. She is once again reminded of the harsh reality. And what is the harsh reality? That she has lost her youth. This yearning for youth introduces the theme of the passage of time and the transitory nature of man's life on earth. Youth, beauty, these are temporary. These are not permanent. With the passage of time, youth, beauty fades away. And in the case of Mrs. Drew, she yearns for her youth. So just as Bubber craves for the cookies, Mrs. Drew also has a temptation, has a craving. And what is it? She wants to regain her youthful appearance. Old faded eyes stared back, eyes deep set in a withered face. Gone, all gone. A sense of despair, anguish, as soon as the boy had left her side. So this is ominous. This is the evil side of Mrs. Drew. And Philip K.Dick is gradually introducing these elements in the narrative to heighten the element of terror. I will see you later, Bubber said. Bubber is still unsuspecting, but Mrs. Drew is disappointed. Please, she whispered, please come back again. She pleads to Bubber. She wants to meet him once again. Is this genuine friendship, or is there any other motive behind this? The readers have already formed an opinion by now. They know that Mrs. Drew wants to be closer to Bubber to regain her youth. She is greedy for her youth. Will you come back? And she wants Bubber to assure her that he is going to come back. Sure, Bubber said listlessly. He pushed the door open. Goodbye, he went down the steps. In a moment, she heard his shoes against the sidewalk. He was gone. Bubber, you come in here. May Searle stood angrily on the porch. You get in here and sit down at the table. Here, the setting changes to Bubber's house. So, from Mrs. Drew's house, we get to see Bubber's household. And we have Bubber's parents. All right, Bubber came slowly up onto the porch, pushing inside the house. What's the matter with you? She caught his arm. Where you been? Are you sick? This shows that perhaps she notices that something is wrong with Bubber. She feels that Bubber is not well. I'm tired. And Bubber is tired. Is this mere physical tiredness? Bubber rubbed his forehead. His father came through the living room with the newspapers in his undershirt. What's the matter? He said. Look at him. May Searle said, all worn out. He is physically exhausted and his appearance reveals that he is all worn out. He is exhausted. What you been doing, Bubber? So why is this change in Bubber? A little while ago, he was just eating cookies, enjoying himself in the comfort of Mrs. Drew's household. What has happened to him that has made him look so exhausted that his mother has noticed it? He's been visiting that old lady, Ralph Searle said, the father. Can't you tell? He's always washed out after he's been visiting her. Very important. So, for over a month he has been going there, and when he returns, the parents observe that Bubber is exhausted and there is something wrong in his appearance. What do you go there for, Bub? What goes on? She gives me cookies. She gives him cookies. May said, you know how he is about things to eat. He is a glutton. He gormandizes delicious food. He is a glutton. Gluttony of Bubber. And it is this gluttony of Bubber that makes him fall into the trap of Mrs. Drew. He would do anything for a plate of cookies. This shows that he is a glutton. What is the meaning of glutton, gluttony, gormandizing? See, it's there on the screen. These are new words. Try to use these words in your answers. Bub. His father said, listen to me, I don't want you hanging around that crazy old lady any more. Do you hear me? I don't care how many cookies she gives you. You come home too tired. This is significant. The parents have noticed this change. No more of that. You hear me? Bubber looked down at the floor, leaning against the door. His heart beat heavily, labored. I told her I would come back. If I break the promise, then she will not feel good. So this shows that Bubber has grown fond of this old lady. He muttered. You can go once more, May said, going into the dining room, but only once more. This is the restriction imposed by the parents. Tell her you won't be able to come back again, though. You make sure you tell her nice. Now go upstairs and get washed up. They notice the change, but they also are unsuspecting. After dinner, better have him lie down, Ralph said, looking up the stairs, watching Bubber climb slowly. His hand on the banister, he is weak. He shook his head. I don't like it. Something is wrong, he murmured. I don't want him going there anymore. He is filled with suspicion now. There's something strange about that old lady. Well, it will be the last time, May said. Wednesday was warm and sunny. Bubber strode along, his hands in his pockets. He stopped in front of McVein's drugstore for a minute, looking speculatively at the comic books. At the soda fountain, a woman was drinking a big chocolate soda. The sight of it made Bubber's mouth water. That settled it. He is a glutton. He is greedy for good food. He turned and continued on his way. He is obese, but he is still eating cookies, even increasing his pace a little. A few minutes later, he came up on the grey sagging, again the color grey, sagging porch and rang the bell. Below him, the weeds blew and rustled with the wind. It was almost 4 o'clock. He could not stay too long, but then it was the last time anyhow. The door opened, and he is about to enter into the fascinating household, into the fascinating world of Mrs. Drew's household. And we have the physical appearance of Mrs. Drew. We have her wrinkled face, and she is very happy. She broke into smiles. Come in, Bernard. It's good to see you standing there. It makes me feel so young again. Just observe how she is uttering these words. It makes me feel so young again to have you come visit. So, on one hand, we can interpret this as something normal. She is happy to meet her friend once again, and since he is a young boy, this old lady, this lonely old lady enjoys his company, and she feels that she regains her youth whenever Bubber visits her. But is this the only reason why she is so happy? Is this the literal, the metaphorical meaning of her words? We will see this We have already got the hint that there is something vicious in her motive. There is something wrong, in fact, in why she wants Babbar's company. She longs for Babbar's company. He went inside looking around. Looking around for what? The cookies. I'll start the cookies. I didn't know if you were coming. She padded into the kitchen. I'll get them started right away. You sit down on the couch. Babbar went over and sat down. He noticed that the table and the lamp were gone. The chair was right up next to the couch. He was looking at the chair in perplexity. He was puzzled when Mrs. Drew came rustling back into the room. So this time, there were some changes in the interior of the house. They are in the oven. I had the batter already. Now, she sat down in the chair with a sigh. Well, how did it go today? How was school? Fine. Again, the same sort of conversation. She nodded. How plump he was. So obese, young boy, the little boy, sitting just a little distance from her. Again and again, the author has focused on the proximity, the closeness, the importance of the closeness between the old lady and the young boy. His cheeks red and full. She could touch him. He was so close. And this makes the reader, fills the readers with fear. Her aged heart thumped. She is old and therefore her heart is also weak and old. And the weak old heart is beating really fast in the company of Babbar. To be young again. Why? Because she is hopeful of regaining her youth once again. Youth was so much. It was everything. This is her temptation. What did the world mean to the old? So she is now frustrated to be old. Do you want to read to me, Bernard? Again, the process of reading. She asked presently. I didn't bring any books. Oh, she nodded. Well, I have some books, she said quickly. I'll get them. She got up, crossing to the book house. As she opened the doors, Babbar said, Mrs. Drew, my father says I can't come here anymore. He says this is the last time. I thought I would tell you. She stopped, standing rigid, a shocking revelation. Everything seemed to leap around her, the room twisting furiously. Her hopes are on the verge of getting shattered. She took a harsh, frightened breath. Bernard, you're not coming back. This shows her disappointment. No, my father says not to. There was silence. The old lady took a book at random and came slowly back to her chair. After a while, she passed the book to him, her hands trembling. The boy took it without expression, looking at its cover. Please read, Bernard, please. All right, he opened the book. Where will I start? Anywhere, Bernard, because the page doesn't matter. He begins to read. It was something by Trollope. She only half heard the words. She is not at all listening to him properly. She put her hand to her forehead, the dry skin. She is just concerned about her withered skin, brittle and thin like old paper. Again, simile. She trembled with anguish. The last time. Hopelessness of Mrs. Drew. Babbar read on, slowly, monotonously. Against the window a fly buzzed. Outside the sun began to set, the air turning cool. A few clouds came up, and the wind in the trees rushed furiously. The old lady sat close by the boy. So, here the readers feel the chill of terror. Outside, the wind in the trees rushing furiously, clouds coming up, the setting sun, and inside we have this old lady who perhaps has some evil plans, and she is close by the boy, the unsuspecting boy, and closer than ever. hearing him read, the sound of his voice, sensing him close by. Was this really the last time? Terror rose up in her heart and she pushed it back. The last time she gazed at him, she observed him, the boy sitting so close to her. What will she do with him? After a time, she reached out her thin, dry hand. The climactic moment, she took a deep breath. He would never be back. There would be no more times, no more. This was the last time he would sit there. Observe the repetition of the expression no more, no more. He will never come back. The hopelessness of the lady. What is she up to? And then she touches his arm. Contact. Direct contact between the old lady. Physical contact between the old lady and the young boy. Babur looked up. What is it? He murmured. You don't mind if I touch your arm, do you? No, I guess not, because he is unsuspecting. He went on reading. The old lady could feel the youngness of him, drawing out of him his youth. And the youth she is instilling, his youth in herself, flowing between her fingers. The direct contact enables her to draw out of Babur all his youthful vitality and vigor. Through her arm, a pulsating, vibrating youngness so close to her. It had never been that close where she could actually touch it. The feel of life made her dizzy, unsteady, and presently it began to happen as before. She closed her eyes again. She slips into the trance-like state, as if a spell, a magic spell has been cast on her, letting it move over her. She feels the energy, the vitality filling her up, carried into her by the sound of the voice and the feel of the arm. The change, the flow was coming over her, the warm rising feeling. She was blooming again like a flower, filling with life, a metaphor, swelling into richness as she had been once long ago in the long forgotten past. She looked down at her arms, rounded they were, and the nails clear, her hair black again, heavy and black against her neck. She touched her cheek, the wrinkles had gone, the skin pliant and soft. Again, we have visual imagery of her. Joy filled her, a growing, bursting joy. She was filled with ecstasy. She was overwhelmed with ecstasy. She was overwhelmed with happiness. She stared around her, perhaps in disbelief, in wonderment, in amazement, or in surprise. All emotions mixed together. At the room, she smiled, feeling her firm teeth and gums, red lips, symbol of youth, beauty and attractiveness, strong white teeth. She was no longer an old, fragile, weak woman. She was now young and attractive, physically strong as well. Firm teeth and gums. This shows her physical strength, her growing physical strength due to her youth. Strong white teeth. Her teeth were also not brittle anymore. Suddenly she got to her feet, her body secure and confident. She was brimming with confidence now. She turned a little lithe, quick circle. Out of joy, she turned a little lithe, quick circle. And what is the meaning of lithe? It is supple or flexible. Babur stopped reading. Are the cookies ready? Babur, who was reading, was thinking about cookies. He was waiting for his cookies. I will see. Her voice was alive. Just observe the transformation of Mrs. Drew. Deep with a quality that had dried out many years ago, many years before. Her voice was now sensual once again. Now it was there again. Her voice, throaty and sensual. What kind of voice? Throaty and sensual. She walked quickly to the kitchen. She was walking quickly. She was no longer physically weak. She had strong bones and therefore she walked quickly. She was energetic. She was active. To the kitchen and opened the oven. She took out the cookies and put them on top of the stove. All ready, she called gaily, happily, "Come and get them." Babbar came past her, his gaze fastened on the sight of the cookies. Babbar's greed for the cookies, his cravings for the cookies will lead to his doomed fate. He did not even notice a woman by the door. The physical transformation of the woman was unnoticed by Babbar because he was preoccupied with his cookies. Mrs. Drew hurried from the kitchen. She was energetic now, active now, and she was moving around the house very quickly. She went into the bedroom, and this time why did she hurry out of the kitchen? Because she went into the bedroom, closing the door after her. Then she turned, gazing into the full-length mirror on the door. Young she was, young again, filled out with the sap of vigorous youth. The youthfulness, her vitality, vigor, zest for life. And she saw her own reflection on the mirror. She was admiring herself. So this is self-love, self-admiration. She was now filled with joy because of her youthful appearance. Sap of vigorous youth. She took a deep breath, her steady bosom swelling. Her eyes flashed and she smiled. She was proud of her achievement. She spun, her skirts flying. Symbolizing her flexible movement, her energetic movement, and her joy. Young and lovely, and this time it had not gone away. This is another important piece of information. This was not a temporary transformation. This time the transformation was complete and it was going to be permanent. And this foreshadows the doomed fate of Babbar. She opened the door. Babbar had filled his mouth and his pockets. He was standing in the center of the living room, his face fat and dull, a dead white. Very, very important. He was white, he was pale. Where was the color? "What's the matter?" Mrs. Drew said. "I'm going." "All right, Bernard, and thanks for coming to read to me." She laid her hand on his shoulder. She was not sad. She was not repentant. She was not remorseful, perhaps because of the knowledge that her transformation was complete and it was permanent. She no longer needed Babbar for her transformation. "Perhaps I will see you again sometime." Very casual. "My father." "I know." She laughed gaily. This time she was not at all sad. She was not nervous. She was not disappointed. Instead of that, she laughed happily, opening the door for him. "Goodbye, Bernard, goodbye." This shows the malicious nature of Mrs. Drew, the selfishness of Mrs. Drew. She watched him go slowly down the steps one at a time. Then she closed the door and skipped back into the room. Again, she skipped back like a young girl. She unfastened her dress and stepped out of it, the worn grey fabric suddenly distasteful to her. So she was wearing a grey fabric. Again, the color grey. So this color is important in the narrative. Color grey stands for Mrs. Drew's old age, her fragile structure, and her disappointment with life. And all these things were suddenly distasteful to her. For a brief second, she gazed at her full, rounded body, her hands on her hips. She was admiring her own beauty. She laughed with excitement. She was filled with excitement as well. Ecstasy, pride, and then excitement, turning a little, her eyes bright. What a wonderful body. Self-appreciation, bursting with life. zest for life. A swelling breast symbolizing youth, beauty and attractiveness. She touched herself. The flesh was firm. So, this is tactile imagery. There was so many things to do, tactile imagery as well as visual imagery. She gazed about her, breathing quickly. So many things. She started the water running in the bathtub and then went to tie her hair up. She was about to clean herself so that she could beautify herself once again, just as she used to do in the long forgotten past. The wind blew around him as he trudged home. The return journey of Babbar. It was late, the sun had set. This is again a foreshadowing. This foreshadows the setting sun of Babbar's life, the impending death or doomed fate of Babbar. And the sky overhead was dark and cloudy sky, symbolizing the darkness that has engulfed the life of Babbar. The wind that blew and nudged against him was cold. This coldness is not only the coldness in nature, but this coldness is the coldness of Mrs. Drew as well. Babbar was deprived of the warmth of his own life force. He was pale and he was getting colder and colder, and it penetrated through his clothing, chilling him. The boy felt tired, physical exhaustion, physical tiredness of Babbar. His head ached, he was feeling sick, and he stopped every few minutes. He could not even walk properly, rubbing his forehead and resting, his heart laboring. So, symbol of his weak heart. He left M Street and went up Pine Street. The wind screeched around him, turbulence in nature, pushing him from side to side. He was so weak now that the wind pushed him from side to side. He shook his head, trying to clear it. So there was confusion in his mind, mental confusion as a result of his weakness. How weary he was, how tired his arms and legs were. A young boy, and in such a miserable condition. So we feel pity for Babbar. He felt the wind hammering at him, the pressure of the wind pushing and plucking at him. He was helpless, and he was somehow managing to return home. Hammering at him, pushing, plucking. This shows these words are associated with violence, but here these words show the helplessness of Babbar and turbulence in nature. He took a breath and went on, his head down, drooping head. At the corner he stopped, holding on to a lamp post as a support. The sky was quite dark. The street lights were beginning to come on. At last he went on, walking as best as he could. "Where is that boy?" Miss Searle said, going out on the porch for the 10th time. So Babbar's parents, we cannot condemn them as irresponsible or they did not love Babbar, they did not control Babbar properly. I think we cannot condemn them in this way. The situation is so unpredictable, so unexpected, so abnormal that it is not possible for normal people to comprehend these things so easily. And this has perhaps resulted in this crisis. The wind whistled and lashed at the porch. There is conflict in nature. The wind is strong, and similarly, there is this metaphorical storm, strong wind in the life of Babbar as well. The two of them looked up and down the dark street, but they could see nothing but a few newspapers and trash being blown along. "Let's go inside," Raph said. "He sure is going to get a licking when he gets home." Again we have Babbar's father's concern. They sat down at the dinner table. So outside the weather is turbulent. So this turbulence is metaphorical. Presently May put down her fork. "Listen, did you hear something?" Ralph listened. Outside, against the front door, there was a faint sound, a tapping sound. faint sound. He stood up. The wind howled outside, blowing the shades in the room upstairs. "I will go, see what it is," he said. He went to the door and opened it. Something grey again. The redness is gone and we have the color grey. Something grey and dry was blowing up against the porch, carried by the wind. He stared at it, but he could not make it out. A bundle of weeds and rags, blown by the wind perhaps. The bundle bounced against his legs. He watched it drift past him against the wall of the house. The ending is significant, dear students. Then he closed the door again slowly. What was it, May called? "Just the wind," Ralph Searle said. The ending does not contain hope. The ending is bleak. Can you justify the actions of Mrs. Drew? Well, we cannot justify her actions. She is an evil character. She is lonely. She yearns for companionship. Everything is fine, but her motives are vicious. Bubber, on the other hand, rouses feelings of pity in the minds of the reader. As Bubber's vitality is sapped away, he grows dull and weak. He leaves Mrs. Drew's place to go home. He is extremely exhausted and feels sick. He walks home slowly. May and Ralph keep waiting for him to come home, and by the time he reaches home and knocks, his knocking grows faint. That means he does not have any strength left in him. By the time he reaches home and knocks, he has devolved into a bundle of debris. Due to his complete transformation, his parents also fail to recognize him. And the story ends with Bubber being blown away by the wind as the door is opened by Ralph. On one hand, we see that Bubber is gone, and on the other hand, we see Mrs. Drew enjoying, experiencing the results of her transformation. Due to the direct and prolonged touch, she achieves a complete transformation, and this time the transformation is not temporary. This transformation is permanent. He should not have been so greedy, and this greed makes him fall a victim of exploitation at the hands of Mrs. Drew. And this is also symbolic of exploitation at the hands of the vicious society, using a person for its own advantage. And as far as the psychological complexity is concerned, Bubber's temptation makes him fall into the trap of Mrs. Drew. So, the cookie lady is strange. She is selfish. We have already discussed this. Bubber is obese. He is a glutton. He is unsuspecting. And both father and mother of Bubber, they have been briefly sketched. Before ending, just quickly jot down the themes. Horror, number 1. Number 2, loneliness. Number 3, transformation. Number 4, yearning for youth. And number 5, temptation.